Thank you for joining us on Bottom Line this week. On the panel to talk about the news of the week is Sugata Mukherjee, the editor of the Triangle Business Journal, and Colin Campbell, the editor of the NC Insider State Government News Service. Sugata, a little bit of news recently on the changing nature of the banking industry in North Carolina. What's going on?
Well, I mean, Charlotte has for years has been considered sort of the number 2 banking center. Well, the numbers that came out from FDIC in ending May or April shows that Charlotte is actually now number 3. San Francisco passed them as the number 2 banking center in the country after, of course, New York. As of like May area, Charlotte region had 16 banking institutions that were based, not headquartered, but that had operations, 2.27 trillion in total assets, these banks. Well, San Francisco jumped them at 2.28 earlier this year. And actually, Charlotte's number of headquarters have also gone down. Earlier this year, there were 2 banks, Capital Bank and Park Sterling, that sort of merged with out-of-state banks. So now Charlotte is only left with 4 banks with headquarters. So I think that is a big sort of development that is going on, at least for the financial community in the state.
I guess a lot still, like Wells Fargo still has a lot of operations there, so there's a lot of banking jobs, even if it's not necessarily the center of power where the CEOs are.
Exactly. And that sort of does make a difference, because when you have CEOs, you have sort of a direct channel in, supporting nonprofit activities, supporting community initiatives. Think about this Wells Fargo sponsored golf tournament that they do every year. Part of the reason why Charlotte got the PGA this year, which starts in a couple of weeks, it's part of the reason that what Hugh McColl and Ed Crutchfield built, that legacy stays. And I don't know if that is a good trend if Charlotte keeps falling down this ladder.
Well, it's interesting because Charlotte was in such fierce competition with Atlanta through much of the 80s to become the southern hub of banking in the United States. But now it seems like the Charlotte business community has diversified somewhat. It's not so monolithically driven by banking. A lot of other industries come into Charlotte. In fact, I think the Charlotte region is home to more German-owned corporate presence than anywhere else in North America. But part of the shifting sands economically of North Carolina, perhaps, that we're seeing financial services decline while other industries are going up.
No doubt. We know for sure that the Charlotte's manufacturing base, this sort of probably led in the international sector by the German companies. The manufacturing base in and around Charlotte is bigger than the other big metro center, which is Raleigh-Durham. And it is growing. Charlotte is also growing in technology. It may not be as big as the Research Triangle Park, Durham, Raleigh area, but it is definitely growing.
All part of a transition within North Carolina. And speaking of transitions, Colin, what's the latest on redistricting? Some hearings this week in the legislature looking at a lawsuit that will require some of the state legislative districts to be redrawn.
Yeah, so we're still waiting to see exactly what the timeline is going to look like. As we're recording this on Thursday, there's a court hearing as we speak going on in Greensboro in a federal courthouse. Not a whole lot of news out of that yet because they're not allowing the reporters there to have more than just a notepad, so we haven't seen any tweets or anything like that. But both sides are making their case there. One side, the legislature, wants to keep the timeline they've set in place where you would have new maps drawn by early November, and then an election in 2018 as currently scheduled in the new districts. The other side would like to see a special election take place in 2018, sometime before the legislature is scheduled to return for its short session in late April, early May. And they would like a more compressed timeline that gets this process done a little bit faster. So we'll see where the court comes down on that. The legislature here, their redistricting committee, met on Wednesday to go through some of the preliminaries, basically to figure out what the timeline is going to be, setting forth what they're going to have for public hearings, opening the opportunity for public comment, and trying to show the court that they are indeed serious about getting this done and getting this done in the next couple months.
So, Colin, if you had to handicap as to what exactly is going to happen, especially before the November 2018 elections, what would you say right now?
I think we're going to see probably pretty big shifts in districts as we saw when the congressional districts were redrawn. It'll be interesting to see, can the Republicans keep the same level of partisan split? My guess is it's hard for them to do that and not lose at least a couple of seats that will become more competitive or could become a Democratic majority. I think they can definitely keep the majority of the legislature as a whole and maybe even their supermajority, but there's going to be certainly more competitive districts coming out of this process one way or the other. And it's also possible we're going to see some double bunking of incumbents, particularly among Democrats. If there are Democrats that the legislative leaders want to get rid of, they can just put them both in the same district, and the same can go for Republicans. Perhaps some fringe members of the Republican caucus who aren't in the good graces of leadership might find themselves running against a fellow Republican.
Well, and some part of the challenge of this is whomever gets elected in 2018 and whatever the alignment of the districts is, will have to work with the incumbent Democratic governor, Roy Cooper, in the second half of his first term on issues of public policy, taxation, regulations, and such.
If there is a shift, you're saying,
Yeah,
certainly
Cooper,
supermajority.
wants to break the supermajority
Right.
so that his vetoes can be sustained. And if that's the case, then yeah, you're right. They have to work with him, and now they can, with the supermajority, they can
have to
ignore
work
him.
with him.
Yeah.
Well, and interestingly, too, as sort of a sideline, the legislators that get elected in 2018 become the incumbents who run for re-election in 2020, where we will have, after that election, the new census data and a complete redraw of the maps altogether. So we may have districts only for two cycles
Exactly.
before they all have to
Exactly.
be redrawn. A very different composition of the General Assembly may follow.
Which I think the Democrats are just looking forward to, because it seems like it's sort of a win-win situation for them. You know, right now the legislature is at a supermajority. They're going like, even if we get back 2 or 3 seats in
Yeah,
2018,
it makes a huge difference. And then they're poised in 2020. If they can get the majority, then they get to draw the lines. And supposedly the governor wants to do an independent redistricting, but we'll see if that happens if they're in charge come 2021.
Yeah, that's right. Well, one thing as we wrap up this segment, Kevin Sigrist, who is the CIO, the Chief Investment Officer for the State Treasurer's Office, recently announced relatively unexpectedly and abruptly that he was leaving that post. Anything you've heard about why this may have come to pass?
this came as a surprise to us as well. Apparently, this came as a surprise to the treasurer from what he said. I believe Segrist was the highest paid state employee, at least he was a couple of years ago, making almost $400,000, if I'm not mistaken. The only thing, looking at the pension fund portfolio, the only thing I can think about is he's probably a little more aggressive of a investment committee chair, if you may, whereas Falwell is probably
Yeah, it's a
little
shift that Falwell's done from stocks into some bonds and cash investments, which are more conservative investments, but Sigrist would have been involved in a lot of the stocks investments. So I think he probably clashed a lot with Falwell. It's the second leading person at the treasurer's office who handles some of the stuff who's left. Seems logical given the change in direction that Falwell's put from Janet Cowell, the Democrat who preceded him.
This sort of, I believe it's not the first time it has happened. It has happened before. But it is sort of interesting given the fact that I believe the pension fund grew by 10% in the past fiscal year. It seems like North Carolina's pension fund was doing just fine. So to have the CIO leave all of a sudden, and the treasurer saying that this came as a surprise to me, definitely is a surprise to us.